Hi, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and pleased to have with me as my guest Jae Lee, who's a partner at Nelson Mullins. Jae, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Richard. It's great to be here.
So, Jae, let me start by asking you have one of the more unusual backgrounds I have come across, at least amongst lawyers, and that is that you have an actual medical degree. Tell me what motivated you to go to medical school in the first place.
I get asked that question a lot, Richard, as you might expect. I'm actually the only son in an immigrant family. I was sort of expected to become a physician, so I
Interesting.
did. I finished medical school. I completed a surgical internship. I got my California medical license and I continue to maintain that license today. Did about 5 years of clinical research at UCLA in Los Angeles, and so you know, I, I've I became a physician. I think in part because I was expected to become a physician. But in high school, my favorite subjects were history and political science.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
yeah, I feel that medicine has to be a calling, sort of like the priesthood.
Yeah,
It's very
yeah,
much
yeah.
like the priesthood in some respects. You get special vestments, the white coat. You get a special title. You're called doctor. But it really does have to be your calling, and I never felt medicine was that for me.
Huh,
Um,
interesting. Well, it's not easy. I mean, medical school is brutal. It's hard to get into. I mean, if you didn't like it, I mean, I think you would have, I mean, the fact that you got through it is pretty amazing, don't you think? I mean, if it wasn't your passion.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't, it wasn't really my calling. I wouldn't say medicine was my passion, but there were many things about medicine that I did enjoy. Certainly being able to help patients, enjoyed some of the science of medicine. Um, so there were still many things I did enjoy about medicine. But again, it really has to be your passion, your calling.
Yeah.
And I never felt that was the case. In fact, I almost took a year between college and medical school to consider whether I should continue to go on to medical
Oh,
school.
interesting.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of law school at the time.
Oh,
Uh,
really? Interesting. Well, what kind of research did you do? You said after medical school, you did 5 years of clinical. What kind of research did you do?
Oh, I worked in traumatic brain injury and cerebral vascular
Oh, wow.
disease
Wow.
at UCLA. So a lot of neuroscience. It was fascinating work. We did
Wow.
some clinical research projects on traumatic brain injury patients. Really exciting and a wonderful time for me. I learned a lot. It was very rewarding to me in
Yeah,
some
yeah,
respects,
yeah.
but
Well, even though it
um,
wasn't your passion, even though you didn't feel like it was your passion, you must have liked it somewhat. Because I mean, I don't think you could do something like that for that long and be committed and be successful if you didn't. I mean, you must have liked it. I'm guessing somewhat.
Oh, I certainly did. I certainly did. And
Yeah.
certainly, as I mentioned, helping patients was very important part of that. I did enjoy the science and the epidemiology of medicine. Again, it wasn't probably
Wasn't
originally
there.
what I was most interested in when I was younger. And later on, my sister actually went to law school. And so she reminded me of my interest in law
Oh,
school. And so it
interesting.
was really my sister who inspired me to go
Oh,
back
interesting.
to what I may have been interested in
Oh,
from the
oh.
beginning, the
Well,
law.
that must have been a very hard decision. I mean, you already have spent so many years schooling and studying. Like, wasn't the thought of going back to school just of something just very hard or not?
Oh, that certainly was. If I had to do my life again, I certainly wouldn't spend as much time in school as I did. But one thing I learned over the years, Richard, was that there are a lot of things in medicine that can tie over to law, really help in law. For example, even from the most basic things, how to interview people, start with open-ended, non-directive questions, and then
Mm.
go down to narrower leading type questions, for example, during a deposition. Very similar to how you take a history and physical examination of a patient.
Well, that makes
Um,
sense.
and in medicine, you're trained to explain very complex subjects to people who may not have a medicine or science background and make those complex subjects understandable to even laypersons. And then there is also, the fiduciary duties in medicine and law are very similar.
Yeah, right.
So, there are very similar aspects to, for example, a physician's duty to a patient, very similar to, for example, a lawyer's duty to their client. And
Yeah.
so a lot of the ethical and moral aspects and fiduciary duties are very similar between the two professions.
Well, that
So,
makes sense.
yeah, so the medical background, I still use it every day in my work,
Now, when
especially
you
since I represent
now,
pharmaceutical and medical device companies.
of course. Now, when you got to law school, did you feel that calling? Like, wow, this felt like home to you. What was that feeling when you first got to law school, which is obviously very different from medical school and stuff you've been doing up to then?
Well, it just fit like a glove. And, it's hard to explain, but, when you finally enter a profession or a field that you felt you is truly your calling and where you should be, it's hard to explain, but you just know.
Yeah, right.
And even from my first day of law school, I just knew. It's very different from my first day of medical school. I had a very rough time. For example, in anatomy, I didn't like being in anatomy class, but the first day of law school was very different. I just
Hmm.
felt like I belonged there, and
Hmm.
this was the right profession for me. So,
Were you thinking constantly, I should have done this years ago?
I certainly think that every day of my legal career. I wish I had started 10 years earlier, 15 years earlier. But it all turned out for the best. As I mentioned, I represent mostly pharmaceutical and medical device companies, and I work in toxic tort litigation. So I use my medical and
Yeah.
science background every day. I also have master public health degree, so I use my medicine, my epidemiology every single day in representing my clients. So
That's pretty cool. What kind of practice do you have? I mean, I realize what kind of clients you, but what kind of substantive legal practice do you have?
mostly work in product liability litigation,
Mm, mm,
representing defendants,
mm,
toxic torts as well. For example, PFAS litigation,
mm,
Proposition 65 claims, that kind of thing.
mm.
And medical device litigation.
Mm.
Also, I did a stint doing some lobbying in DC on FDA issues, and so I
Mm.
do FDA regulatory counseling as well.
Oh,
So.
interesting. Now, a lot of people with science backgrounds typically go into IP or patent litigation. Is there a reason you didn't do that, or was it kind of accidental, or you deliberately chose this path?
Oh no, actually, I actually started in intellectual property litigation
Hmm.
and patent prosecution. I assisted on that as well when I was a
Yeah,
junior associate.
yeah.
But the firm I started my career with wanted to develop a pharmaceutical and medical device product liability practice. And
Hmm.
so I was actually recruited to help build that practice at that
Hmm.
firm.
Hmm.
I think it made sense to everyone at the time, just with my background. But like many people with a medical background who go into law, I did start in intellectual property
Yeah, yeah,
litigation,
yeah. Do you like
which
this?
I which I continue to find very interesting.
Do you do any intellectual property stuff now, or not really?
No, not really. The most of the work I do now is product liability
Yeah,
and
yeah,
toxic
yeah,
torts
yeah, yeah.
and FDA regulatory counseling.
Well, I'm also assuming, I mean, obviously your medical knowledge is also very helpful, but in talking to clients, I assume your clients are frequently doctors or medical professionals. So your background, do you find that that's also very helpful?
Oh, I do. And for example, I'm not even the only physician attorney at Nelson Mullins.
Oh,
I have a,
really?
I have a colleague, Erica James, in Miami, who's also a physician attorney.
Oh, wow.
So, there's some obvious advantages to having that kind of background. You can talk the talk of the scientific folks, for example, who work for your client. You can gain an understanding of the scientific and medical issues that may be involved in a product liability or toxic court case.
Mhm.
But one of the most interesting things I learned working in law is that you often have colleagues who don't have an extensive scientific background, but they learn so much
Mhm.
medicine and science and epidemiology just doing their legal work that I have many colleagues, attorneys who may not have advanced degrees in science or medicine. But I feel like I'm speaking to a physician or epidemiologist when I
Oh,
speak with them.
interesting.
They're so well versed in those issues. For example, Michael Hogue and Eric Payne are two of my colleagues at Nelson Mullins, and boy, every time I talk to them, I feel like I'm talking to a scientist or an
Interesting.
epidemiologist. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's pretty
yeah,
fun.
so it's been wonderful. I consider myself to be a trial lawyer who just happens to have a background in medicine and epidemiology.
Mm.
But it's really wonderful to have colleagues who are not just outstanding lawyers, but who really understand the science just because they devoted themselves to learning the science. And I find myself learning from them every single day. So that's one of the real pleasures of working in the law.
Well, when you said, you wish you had done it 10 years earlier, but then also do you think to yourself, it's a good thing you did it at all? Because I mean, if you'd waited another 5 years, maybe it would be too hard to come back to law school. That's the other way of thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I wish I had come to the law earlier, but then I don't think I would be here in the same place without having gone through all of my experiences in medicine,
Yeah, yeah,
epidemiology, and
yeah,
research.
yeah.
So I'm grateful for the path that has led me here, but at the same time, I think you do wish you had some of that time back, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
life is funny that way. So
yeah, yeah.
take life as it comes.
Does your sister remind you frequently that she's the one that suggested law school to you?
No, I remind her all the time. I'm very grateful to my sister. She's one of the brightest and most wonderful people I know. She really inspired me to go to law school, and um, she's one of the best things in my life. And so I keep reminding her that she's the reason I'm in the law, and so I'll always be grateful to my sister.
That's very cool. Well, Jay, I really appreciate your time taking the time to share your story. It's such an interesting background. As I said, I rarely run across medical doctors, and I'm really happy that you obviously it's great to hear how you found a career that you really feel passionate about.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate the chance to speak with you, and I'm very happy and I'm glad where I am in my life. So,
Very cool. This is Richard Hsu and Jae Lee. Thanks.
thank you. Take care.